There's a subtle prison many people live inside, and it's not made of steel bars or locked doors. It's made of silent expectations, polite smiles, and the ever-present question, did I do enough to be liked? Approval seeking isn't just a habit. For many, it becomes a lifestyle, an unconscious strategy to feel safe, valued, and accepted. But the deeper truth is this: the more you chase external approval, the more distant you become from your true self. It begins early. As children, we learn quickly which behaviors earn praise and which invite rejection. Cry too loudly and you're told to be quiet. Get too angry and you're labeled difficult. Show too much ambition and you're warned not to make others uncomfortable. So you adapt. You become pleasing, palatable, and polished. You wear the mask. Jung called it the persona, that gets you through school, through friendships, through work, through love. Over time, this persona becomes so refined that even you forget where it ends and your real self begins. But there's a cost. Every time you silence your truth to keep the peace, a piece of you fades. Every time you smile through discomfort, something inside tightens. And eventually you start to notice a deep fatigue, not just in your body, but in your soul. You realize that you've built a life that looks good to others, but feels hollow to you. Here's the thing: seeking approval is not inherently wrong. It's a survival instinct. We're social creatures wired to bond, to belong. The problem begins when your sense of self-worth becomes entirely dependent on external affirmation. When every decision, from what you wear to who you date to how you speak, is filtered through the lens of will this make them like me? That's when you're no longer living a life, you're performing one. Carl Jung taught that this is the danger of the persona. It starts as a necessary mask we wear to navigate society, but when it becomes fused with our identity, we lose touch with the richness of our inner world. Beneath the persona lies what Jung called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've disowned, repressed, or labeled as unacceptable. Anger, desire, selfishness, vulnerability, all the raw, real parts we learn to hide in exchange for approval. But here's the paradox: everything we suppress doesn't disappear, it waits. The shadow doesn't vanish just because we ignore it. It leaks out in our triggers, in our envy, in our overreactions, and it especially shows up in the fear of disapproval. The more we fear judgment, the more power we give to others over our emotional state. We become emotionally outsourced. Our peace is no longer in our hands, but in the hands of anyone who might frown at us. This is not freedom, this is emotional servitude, and it cannot coexist with sovereignty. To begin reclaiming yourself, you must first become aware of how approval seeking shows up in your daily life. Notice how often you tailor your words to be more likable. Notice the anxiety when someone disagrees with you. Notice the guilt that follows saying no. These aren't just quirks, they're symptoms of a deeper belief. If I am not approved of, I am not safe. That belief must be questioned, because here's what they don't tell you. Approval is a moving target. Please one person and another will disapprove. Follow one trend and another will tell you you're out of touch. Live small and you're boring. Live boldly and you're arrogant. You can't win a game where the rules keep changing. The only real win is to stop playing that game altogether. When you stop living for applause, something extraordinary happens. You begin to hear your own voice again. The voice that isn't trying to impress, convince, or entertain. The voice that whispers what you truly want. It may be quiet at first. It's been drowned out for years, but it's still there, waiting patiently. This is the beginning of emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel whole without needing anyone else to agree, praise, or validate you. Sovereignty doesn't mean isolation, it means groundedness. It means being able to stand in your truth, even if others misunderstand it. It means you become the source of your own emotional weather. You're no longer tossed around by the winds of opinion. You might be wondering, how do you stop seeking approval when the habit runs so deep? The answer lies in turning inward, in observing the roots of your behaviors with compassion, not criticism. Every people-pleasing instinct you've developed came from a time when it made sense. You weren't weak, you were surviving. But now it's time to evolve. What once protected you is now limiting you. This is where shadow work begins. You don't destroy the parts of you that want to be liked, you meet them. You ask, what are you afraid will happen if we disappoint someone? Often the answer is rejection, abandonment, or shame. And then you ask, is that still true? And slowly you begin to realize that the fear you carry is rooted in the past, not the present. You are no longer that child desperately needing permission to exist. You are an adult capable of validating your own worth. One powerful practice here is emotional naming. Instead of reacting or suppressing, you pause and name the feeling. I feel anxious because I think I disappointed them. I feel resentment because I said yes when I wanted to say no. Naming brings awareness, and awareness creates choice. With awareness, you can pause before the automatic smile, before the reflexive apology, before the pleasing. You begin to live consciously, not reactively. And in this pause lies power. The power to choose integrity over approval. The power to let silence speak louder than justification. The power to know that just because someone disapproves doesn't mean you did something wrong, it simply means you did something they wouldn't have done. That's not a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their perspective. When you no longer fear disapproval, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to attract, but because authenticity is attractive. People sense it, they trust it, and more importantly, you trust yourself. Your decisions no longer require consensus. Your emotions no longer demand permission. You are, finally, in your own orbit. And it's in that orbit that something even more powerful happens. You begin to notice how much of your energy was once spent managing perceptions. The way you phrased emails, responded to texts, posted online, even how you dressed or spoke in public, all filtered through the unconscious lens of how will this look? Now you begin to strip away the performance. You dress in what feels like you. You speak from a place of clarity instead of calculation. You find yourself breathing more freely because you're no longer negotiating with invisible judges in every room. Let's be honest, this transition isn't always graceful. At first, the absence of applause can feel like silence, and that silence can feel like failure. But in truth, it's space. Space where you can finally listen inward, and in that space, you'll confront your own unmet needs, not for more attention, but for deeper connection. Not for more likes, but for more truth. When you live for approval, connection is shallow because it's based on a version of you that doesn't really exist. But when you live from sovereignty, connection becomes richer because it's grounded in what's real, not what's rehearsed. At the heart of this transformation is the shift from emotional reactivity to emotional awareness. Approval seeking is inherently reactive. You walk into a situation, feel uncertain, and instantly scan for clues. Who's in charge? What's the mood? How do I need to act to fit in here? That scanning takes you out of presence and into performance. It disconnects you from your intuition, which always speaks quietly but clearly. The goal isn't to become robotic or unfeeling, it's to become conscious. To notice the inner tug before it pulls you into an old pattern. To sense the clench in your chest before the automatic yes leaves your lips. Imagine for a moment that your emotional life is a landscape. Most people live like weather vanes, tossed by every gust of wind, every storm of emotion, every unexpected gust of criticism. But what if you were the sky instead? Vast, steady, open. The emotions still come, but they pass. The disapproval still arrives, but it doesn't define you. Someone says something hurtful, it stings, but it doesn't shape your self-concept because you've begun to understand. What others think of you is often just a mirror of their own story, not a measure of your truth. This is not just philosophy, it's neurobiology. The human brain is shaped by repetition, The more you respond to discomfort by shrinking or pleasing, the more those neural pathways strengthen. But here's the hopeful part. The brain is also plastic. It changes. Through mindfulness, conscious reflection, and courageous small choices, you can rewire your responses. When you begin to pause in the face of disapproval instead of reacting, you're literally sculpting new neural patterns. You're training your nervous system to tolerate discomfort without collapsing into shame. One powerful practice is the pause and name technique. The next time you feel the urge to please, pause for just 5 seconds. Name what's happening internally. I'm afraid they won't like me. That simple act of naming creates a gap, a space where awareness can grow. Over time, these micro-pauses accumulate, and you begin to build a buffer between stimulus and response. You stop being a puppet of other people's preferences, and you start becoming the author of your own reactions. This is how sovereignty is built, not through grand declarations, but through 1,000 subtle shifts. You say no and survive the discomfort. You speak your truth and watch the world not collapse. You disappoint someone you care about, and you realize their love wasn't as fragile as you feared, or that your peace matters more than their approval. These moments build emotional muscle. They prove to your nervous system that safety doesn't only come from being liked, it comes from being real. But let's not romanticize the journey. Detaching from approval can feel lonely at times. You may lose people along the way, friends, co-workers, even partners who are more attached to your persona than your person. That's painful, but it's also clarifying, because what remains is more honest. What stays is more aligned. You no longer have to wonder, would they still love me if I stopped performing, because you already have. And the ones who stayed? They loved the you beneath the mask. This is the beginning of detachment, not from people, but from illusion. Detachment doesn't mean apathy or coldness. It means your center of gravity returns to you. It means you can love without losing yourself, support without self-abandonment, be present without performing. You no longer chase closure, applause, or explanation. You allow people to misunderstand you without rushing to correct them. You stop bleeding energy to fix perceptions that were never yours to control. There's an immense peace in that, because approval is exhausting. It's a thirst that never ends. The more you feed it, the hungrier it becomes. But authenticity? That nourishes. It's quiet, but powerful. When you live authentically, your inner world stops revolving around others' opinions and starts revolving around your own values, your own compass. You stop chasing safety in the form of acceptance and begin cultivating it from within. One of the most liberating shifts you can make is from asking what will they think of me to what do I think of this? That single reframe moves you from dependency to ownership. It turns every situation into a mirror, not of how to gain approval, but of how to practice integrity. You begin asking deeper questions. Am I proud of how I showed up? Did I honor my own boundary? Was I clear and kind? These are questions of the sovereign self. And with time, something sacred happens. You stop measuring your worth by how palatable you are to others. You stop shrinking to avoid conflict. You stop twisting yourself into versions that others prefer. Instead, you walk into rooms fully as you are, not with arrogance, but with quiet groundedness. You no longer need to be everything to everyone because you're finally everything to yourself. The need to perform drops away, and in its place is presence, steady, rooted, alive. The deeper you go into this journey of detaching from approval, the more you realize how much of your past was shaped by fear, not just fear of judgment, but fear of abandonment, disconnection, and invisibility. Approval was never really about praise. It was about feeling like you belonged, that you mattered, that you were seen. But when you live for approval, you begin to forget that the real kind of belonging isn't something you earn through performance. It's something you create through authenticity. And that kind of belonging can never be taken away because it was never conditional to begin with. This is why surrender becomes a vital piece of the process. Not surrender in the passive sense, but surrender as an act of wisdom, a willingness to let go of what no longer serves your wholeness, even if it once felt like survival. You surrender the chase. You surrender the habit of performing. You surrender the illusion that you must constantly earn your place in the world. And in that surrender, something unexpected happens. You begin to rise, not in the way the world celebrates with loud applause, but in the quiet, sturdy way that only inner peace can give. Surrender also means giving up the fantasy of control. So many approval-seeking behaviors are rooted in an unconscious desire to control outcomes. If I'm perfect, they won't leave. If I'm agreeable, they won't get angry. If I'm helpful, they'll love me. But true emotional maturity comes from realizing you cannot control how others see you, receive you, or respond to you. You can only control how honestly and intentionally you show up. And when that becomes enough, when showing up with integrity is your only measure of success, you start to experience a freedom that no amount of external praise can offer. This freedom is not about rebellion or recklessness. It's about alignment. It's about knowing the difference between being kind and being a doormat, between being flexible and being self-abandoning. When approval no longer dictates your every move, you begin to live by a deeper compass, one that points inward instead of outward. Decisions are no longer driven by fear of rejection, but by clarity of purpose. You become selective with your energy. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't listening. You stop arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer beg to be chosen because you've already chosen yourself. And that's a radical act, choosing yourself. In a world that trains us to constantly measure our worth through comparison, validation, and external metrics, choosing yourself is a rebellion, not against others, but against the inner narrative that told you you weren't enough. That voice, once loud, begins to quiet, not because you silenced it with force, but because you stopped feeding it with doubt. Every time you say no when you mean it, every time you let someone down by telling the truth, every time you stay rooted when others try to pull you into their chaos, you reaffirm your sovereignty. Neuroscience supports this transformation. The more we act in alignment with our true values, especially in the face of discomfort, the more our brain reinforces that behavior as safe. Over time, people-pleasing becomes the discomfort, and authenticity becomes the comfort. This is neuroplasticity in action. The same brain that once screamed danger when facing disapproval begins to relax. The stress responses weaken, the inner critic softens. You begin to rewire yourself, not into someone new, but back into who you always were beneath the layers of approval-seeking adaptation. And this rewiring doesn't just change your inner world, it changes the way others relate to you. When you no longer signal that you're available for self-sacrifice, people stop expecting it. When you no longer over-explain or over-apologize, people begin to respect your boundaries. It may unsettle some at first, especially those who benefited from your old patterns, but eventually the dynamics shift. Relationships become more honest, more balanced. You're no longer giving to earn love, you're giving from fullness or not at all. A powerful metaphor for this shift is the difference between a candle and the sun. When you live for approval, you're like a candle, flickering, fragile, easily blown out by the wind of disapproval. But when you reclaim your inner power, you become like the sun, radiant from within, unaffected by external weather. The sun does not ask to be seen, it does not beg to be appreciated, it simply shines, and in doing so it warms everything around it. That's what happens when you live in alignment. Your presence nourishes others not through effort, but through essence. Of course, this doesn't mean you become immune to pain. You will still feel the sting of criticism. You will still sometimes doubt yourself. The difference is, you don't stay there. You don't spiral. You don't let someone's disapproval dislodge your center. You allow the feeling, you sit with it, and then you return to your truth, because now you have a home within yourself. A place of safety that doesn't vanish when someone frowns at you or misunderstands your intention. This is what emotional resilience really looks like. It's not about being untouched by life. It's about being unshaken by things that used to collapse you. It's about knowing that even when someone doesn't see your value, it doesn't mean it's not there. You stop seeking confirmation, and instead you offer confirmation to yourself. You stop handing your peace to others and start reclaiming it piece by piece. Perhaps most beautifully, this transformation invites you to relate to others more compassionately. When you no longer need people to validate you, you stop trying to control them. You stop resenting them for not giving you what you didn't give yourself. You meet them where they are. You love more freely. You listen more fully. Approval seeking creates transaction. Sovereignty creates connection. One demands, the other allows. Eventually, you begin to recognize the moments you used to collapse, the silence after saying no, the tension after voicing disagreement, the pause after expressing a boundary. Those moments used to terrify you. Now they empower you, because you know what they represent. Not disconnection, but liberation. Not threat, but growth. You understand that discomfort is the price of authenticity, and you're willing to pay it, because the cost of pretending, of suppressing, of shape-shifting to be liked, it's far greater. It's a slow erosion of your soul. In reclaiming your emotional sovereignty, you don't become invincible, but you do become whole, and wholeness is magnetic, not because it performs, but because it is. It's calm in the face of chaos, it's anchored in a world of drift, it's self-trust in a sea of self-doubt. You become someone others can rely on, not because you bend to please, but because your presence is steady. Not everyone will understand that version of you. Some will call it cold, selfish, even arrogant. Let them. That's not your burden to carry. You didn't come here to be understood by everyone. You came here to be yourself. And as you walk further into that self-defined path, something deep within you begins to heal, not through the validation you once craved, but through the integrity you now embody. You no longer need applause to feel worthy. You no longer need agreement to feel certain. You no longer outsource your inner peace to the emotional climate of the room. Instead, you stand quietly, powerfully, in your own experience, and from this grounded place you start to make choices that align not with what's popular, but with what's true. This realignment touches every area of your life. In your work, you stop trying to mold yourself into the ideal employee or perfect leader and start honoring your voice. You speak up, not to dominate or prove anything, but to contribute with authenticity. You don't overextend to be seen. You contribute because you believe in what you're doing. If it's not aligned, you begin to walk away. Not from a place of bitterness, but from deep clarity. That clarity becomes your compass, more accurate than any feedback form or performance review could ever be. In relationships, the change is even more profound. Approval seeking often turns relationships into performance stages, where love is confused with role-playing and connection is built on conditional masks. But when you detach from the need to be liked, love becomes cleaner. It's no longer about proving your worth. It's about sharing it. You stop trying to be who someone wants and instead bring your full self into the space, and that is where true intimacy begins. Not when we impress each other, but when we reveal ourselves. This doesn't mean every relationship survives the shift. Some will fall away. You'll notice how much of your connection was built on your willingness to bend. You'll notice who clings to the version of you that no longer exists. And that grief is real. You'll grieve not only the relationships, but the parts of yourself that believed you had to perform to be loved. But eventually, you'll feel something even deeper than grief. Relief, because the version of you that never got to rest, that always had to be on, is finally allowed to exhale. And in that exhale, you discover presence, not the kind of forced mindfulness that you try to cultivate with effort, but the natural, grounded presence that arises when you're no longer trying to impress, convince, or manage the emotional state of everyone around you. You begin to live slower, not lazy, conscious. You listen more intently, you speak more deliberately, You move through space as though you belong there, because you finally believe you do. Not because someone told you so, but because you know it within yourself. This self-knowing isn't loud. It doesn't need to broadcast. It doesn't need a stage. It's quiet and steady, like a river beneath the surface. It carries you, and when doubt creeps in, as it always will, you don't panic. You pause. You breathe. You listen. You've stopped reacting from the wound and started responding from the wisdom. That shift is everything. It means the approval you once begged for externally is now something you give yourself internally, again and again. This doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you whole. Arrogance demands recognition. Wholeness doesn't need it. Arrogance defends. Wholeness allows. Arrogance is fragile, built on the shifting sands of others' opinions. But wholeness is rooted. It knows what it is and what it is not. And it doesn't need to fight for validation because it's already home. Now, this doesn't mean you stop growing. On the contrary, real self-trust allows for deeper, more honest growth. You stop improving yourself to gain approval and start evolving because you want to live more truthfully. You become less reactive to criticism, not because you're numb, but because you can now discern. You ask, is there truth here I can use? If yes, you use it. If not, you release it. Either way, you're free. Feedback no longer shapes your identity, it simply informs your direction. In this way, your sense of self becomes fluid, but not unstable. You're open, but not porous. You're discerning, but not defensive. You're grounded, but not rigid. This is emotional maturity, not needing to be liked, but being willing to be misunderstood without shrinking. You don't need to win every argument, correct every misperception, or prove your point. You recognize the energy cost of doing so, and you choose peace over performance. You begin to trust your silence more than your explanations. You begin to see how often noise is mistaken for clarity. But clarity doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to be decorated. It simply is. And when you carry that inner clarity, you realize that many things don't even require your response. Your energy becomes sacred. You no longer leak it out to gain acceptance. You protect it. You conserve it. You move from performance to presence. This isn't easy. The world still rewards performance. It still hands out trophies for who fits the mold best. But you're no longer applying for that role. You're not here to win a popularity contest. You're here to live your truth. And that's a different path. Sometimes lonelier, often quieter, but always more alive. Because you're no longer playing a role, you're living a life. And that life is uniquely yours. You'll find new ways to relate, not from neediness, but from wholeness. You'll offer love without strings, compassion without depletion, truth without apology. You'll become magnetic, not because you're trying to attract, but because you're finally being real. And realness resonates. It cuts through noise. It calms nervous systems. It awakens something ancient and honest in others. You're no longer a product of approval. You become a presence of authenticity. And in that authenticity, you inspire others to do the same. Not by telling them to, but by modeling it. You become the friend who doesn't gossip to stay relevant, the partner who doesn't self-abandon to keep the peace, the colleague who holds boundaries without guilt, the parent who validates emotions without needing control. You become someone others feel safe around, not because you're agreeable, but because you're consistent. Integrity becomes your offering. Presence becomes your legacy. This is the quiet revolution, the inner revolution. The moment you stop living to be liked is the moment you start living to be whole. The moment you stop editing yourself for applause is the moment your true voice is born. And when that voice speaks, not loudly, but clearly, it carries the kind of weight that approval never could. Because it's not trying to be heard. It's just telling the truth. And now, at the end of this journey, you begin to realize that the search for approval was never about vanity, it was about safety. It was your nervous system seeking a signal that you belonged, that you mattered, that you were allowed to exist without punishment. And in that light, there is no shame in having once sought it. You were simply trying to survive, to find your place in a world that often made you feel like you had to earn it. But survival is not the same as living, and at some point, if you want to thrive, you must leave behind the systems, internal and external, that kept you small. This is the path of individuation. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming who you truly are, beyond the persona, beyond the projections, beyond the roles. It's not about becoming better, it's about becoming whole. It's about integrating the shadow, honoring the inner voice, and stepping fully into the truth of your being. This isn't a straight path. It winds through discomfort, grief, and profound vulnerability, but it also opens into freedom, depth, and a quiet joy that can't be touched by opinion. To individuate is to finally understand that your worth is not up for debate, that no amount of applause or criticism adds or subtracts anything from your value. You don't need to be more of anything to be enough. You don't need to be thinner, funnier, softer, smarter, or more successful. You don't need to fix yourself into acceptability. You need only to be yourself, with honesty, courage, and compassion. That's the work. That's a liberation. And liberation has a flavor. It tastes like silence after noise, stillness after chaos, truth after years of distortion. It feels like coming home to yourself. You wake up one day and realize you are no longer waiting, not for approval, not for permission, not for the perfect moment to begin. You are already it. You are already whole. That doesn't mean you won't grow, but your growth is no longer about fixing what's broken. It's about expanding what's true, and there's a world of difference between those two paths. From this place of inner wholeness, you begin to reimagine what power is. True power, you realize, has nothing to do with dominance, control, or superiority. It's not about being louder or more convincing. It's not about followers, titles, or applause. True power is sovereignty, the ability to stay centered, to respond instead of react, to know who you are even when others don't. It's the ability to hold space for your own experience without collapsing into performance. It's the quiet knowing that no matter what storm is swirling around you, your anchor is internal. And that's when life starts to reflect back your transformation. You stop attracting dynamics that require you to prove your worth. You stop engaging in conversations that drain your energy. You stop participating in cycles that ask you to shrink. It's not about cutting people off in anger. It's about naturally outgrowing what no longer fits your truth. You stop begging to be seen and start seeing yourself fully, without distortion, without editing, without apology. It's a shift from asking, who do I need to be for them to love me, to who am I when I love myself enough to be honest? And the answers that arise from that question are your roadmap. They don't lead to a perfectly curated life. They lead to a real one with texture, one with both solitude and sacred connection, one where your inner peace is no longer held hostage by someone else's opinion. That is the life worth living. That is the self-worth returning to. You'll still make mistakes, you'll still feel fear, that's part of being human. But the difference is, those things won't derail you, they won't define you. You'll begin to understand that even in your most uncertain moments, you are still intact. Even when others disapprove, misunderstand, or criticize, you remain whole. You return to yourself faster. You recover with more grace. You soften, but you don't collapse. You stay open, but not exposed. And perhaps the most profound realization of all is this: the version of you that once needed constant validation didn't need to be shamed or eliminated. She needed to be loved. He needed to be seen. That version of you wasn't weak. They were just trying their best with what they knew. So you don't reject that old self. You integrate them. You say thank you. You say you kept me safe when I didn't know how to be strong. And then you gently let them rest. Because you are the adult now. You are the guide. You are the home. This integration of past and present, shadow and light, fear and strength, is what makes the transformation sustainable. You're not just performing self-love, you're practicing it. Not in grand declarations, but in daily, deliberate choices. You choose not to explain yourself to someone who won't understand. You choose not to chase after silence. You choose to rest, even when the world praises hustle. You choose to speak your truth, even when your voice shakes. These are the ways you reclaim your life, moment by moment, breath by breath. End of prayer. And in time, your life begins to align not just internally, but externally. Opportunities arise that match your truth. People appear who resonate with your realness. You find yourself in spaces that feel safe, not because they require nothing from you, but because they invite everything that's real. This is not magic. It's not manifestation. It's resonance. You attract what you embody. When you stop pretending, the world stops projecting. What remains is real. What remains is you. So, if you take nothing else from this message, take this. You do not need to earn the right to be who you are. You were born worthy. You were born whole. The pursuit of approval may have helped you survive, but it will not help you thrive. To thrive, you must return to yourself, again and again, with honesty, with grace, with courage. Let the world misunderstand you. Let the applause fade. Let the silence be your teacher. And in that quiet, may you hear the only voice that truly matters, your own. Because once you stop seeking approval, you begin to live. Fully, authentically, unshakably. And that is where your real power begins. Though this is where the story ends, not with a grand finale or a standing ovation, but with a quiet return, a return to yourself, the self beneath the mask. The self that no longer performs for applause, but lives for alignment. The self that no longer asks, "Am I enough for them?" but whispers, "Am I honest with myself?" Because in the end, the most radical act is not changing who you are to be loved, but loving who you are enough not to change for anyone. You don't need to prove anything anymore. Not your worth, not your goodness, not your strength. The real you doesn't need to be liked. It needs to be lived. So step out of the performance, step into your presence. Let them misunderstand, let them question, let them walk away if they must. Because you are no longer seeking approval. You are seeking truth, and you've just found it within you. That's the real beginning. And so, with everything you've come to realize about masks, about freedom, about truth, you're left with something far more valuable than the approval you once chased. You're left with you. Not the constructed self, not the performing self, but the present self, whole, awake, anchored. This version of you doesn't need to hustle for worthiness. You don't need to manage how you're perceived, spin the narrative, or keep one eye on the room to ensure you're accepted. You are no longer available for the performance of perfection. You are available only for the truth, and truth, unlike approval, is sustainable. It doesn't crumble when someone frowns. It doesn't flinch when someone leaves. It stays because it's real. And from this place of realness, your life becomes yours again. Your yes has weight. Your no has roots. Your boundaries are not walls, but expressions of clarity. You stop asking who you need to be for others, and instead start asking who you've always been beneath the noise. That's not selfish, that's sacred. You begin to see that approval was never the destination. It was a detour, a necessary one perhaps for your learning and growth, but not the path. The path is presence. The path is peace. The path is self-trust so deep, so steady, that you can finally look in the mirror and say, I am not here to please the world. I am here to be myself. That kind of knowing cannot be bought. It cannot be borrowed. It is earned. In the moments you disappoint someone and survive it. In the moments you speak your truth and feel your body tremble but don't take it back. In the moments you are alone but not lonely because your own company is no longer a punishment but a sanctuary. You become the home you were always searching for. And as you walk forward from here, you'll still encounter resistance. You'll still feel the echoes of the old pattern, the urge to please, the desire to be liked. But now you'll notice it. You'll breathe through it. And you'll remember, peace is not the absence of disapproval. It's the absence of self-betrayal. So when the approval doesn't come, or when it does, but it no longer excites you, smile. That is the evidence of your growth. That is the sign you are finally becoming sovereign. You are no longer the shapeshifter, the over-explainer, the emotional hostage. You are the author now. And this chapter you're about to write, is yours alone. No applause necessary. Just truth, just presence, just you.